Good morning, everyone at Contemporary Issues. We've got another big crowd. Should we start taking entrance fee next week? $20 entrance fee?
You don't want your crowd to bid.
No. We're not gonna do an entrance fee. Hi, Grant, I see you online. Good to see you too. Welcome, everybody, and today we're going to talk about how white people in America are going to become the minority in the coming years, and other ways that the minority can tyrannize the majority. So we're looking forward to that.
Okay.
And it reminds me of last week when we talked about the David Brooks book, in which he said we are moving that way and we don't have the social skills or the appreciation of other people to really take advantage of that like we should. We need to learn that part of it too, if we're going to live in a multicultural, multiracial society. So with that, what?
Millennials are better.
Millennials are better at it than us, Jeff says. Yeah, probably right. Yes, be kind covers it all. That's right. Usual announcements, Zoomers, we are so glad to have you here. Please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen, and we are recording this for future playback. And maybe even mute your cell phones if you haven't already to be on worship mode. And other announcements. There's a good little class that somebody wanted me to promote. Betty, yeah, this your class, Betty?
Speak louder, Betty.
Yeah, class about American political parties on Tuesday, this Tuesday at 2:00 here. Why political parties arose in the US and issues that led to the development of newer political parties.
Do we know who's teaching that class?
Is that senior?
Somebody from Active Minds.
They send a good.
Oh, okay.
They have their own people.
Yes, okay. And just briefly, speaking of political parties, this week, the Republican convention, did anybody watch it or did everybody watch it? Yes. I watched most of it on and off and was, to be honest, I was really impressed by the way it was run and that they covered everybody in that. They had every conceivable group that you could think of. They had a Jew for Trump. They had Franklin Graham talking about evangelicals for Trump. They had the Gold Star family that had lost kids in the wars. Kid Rock for the hip hop group. Hulk Hogan for the wrestling group. They are trying, and they moved quickly and they got to the point. And the RNC, Republican National Committee, did a good job of presenting it. I thought, whatever you think about Trump or J.D. Vance, yeah, they did. Let's hope the Democrats can do as good a production job as the Republicans did. Yeah, what do you think, Lowell? Somebody? Oh, okay, Grant, go right ahead. We can hear you.
Janet Williams?
You're muted.
Okay, all right. I watched the movie Hillbilly Elegy the other day, and it's an amazing movie. It really is. If it doesn't make any difference if you're what color you are or anything, to come through what he went through, and now his mother and so forth. It's just an amazing movie. Everyone, whether you're a Trumper or not a Trumper or whatever, it would inspire you to watch it.
The book is good too.
Yes, yes, I agree. Jan, you still with us there? Yeah, Jan, you had your hand up. Go right ahead.
Didn't really mean to have my hand up, but I agree. I watched the so, and it's interesting that now has come on Netflix at the timing. I'm sure that was probably planned, but anyway, it was a very good movie, and I'm sure it's going to bring a lot of attention to our nominee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very interesting how all this is coming together. quick thing, maybe some of you didn't see too in the news about the attempt, the shooter, the assassin. Flew a drone over the area for quite a while and did that, scoping out what to do. And then the local law enforcement agency said yesterday, I believe for the first time that they were not assigned to protect anything outside of the fenced perimeter. They said, we disagree with the Secret Service chief, said that they were. They said, none of us have been able to find any directive that told us that we were in charge of things outside of that perimeter. So it'll be interesting. The Secret Service chief testifies tomorrow before Congress. See what questions they have for her. So we shall see. Gene, go ahead.
On another note, just turning a bit,
It's okay.
Brooks, you were quoting Brooks, David, he predicts that Wednesday we'll get the announcement. Is
Oh,
Biden
okay.
in, or does the backup quarterback come in, or open convention? So
Wednesday, okay.
Wednesday, after that, now who goes back home?
Seems that train is inevitable, but
Huh.
we shall see. Okay. Very good. Okay, any other thoughts? All righty, Ron, thank you for another good topic today.
Okay, this is a two-parter, and it's of course based primarily on the book Tyranny of the Minority. Today, we're going to talk about a lot of the undergirdings of America, a touch of its history, its culture, its racial makeup, how it's changing. We're going to look back into American history a way and look at particularly how the Black race was kept in captivity, slavery, for so long, and set the scene for next week. Next week, we'll get more into many of the political and structural foundations that are enabling a minority to control many of the levers of government. Good example, the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, giving disproportionate power to small states, the Senate, incredibly disproportionate. So next week we'll get into more of that, but let's set the scene. Let's delve into American history. I also want to pass around some materials, and I suggest I'll send them this way. Keep them going, crisscrossing back, and of course I do want them back. Some other excellent resources beside the book Tyranny of the Minority, which is a follow-on to the book How Democracies Die. Pass that one around. But complementing some of the things we'll mention today, I think one of the best DVDs is a good 25 years old, but Separate but Equal. It's about 4 hours or more long, but it's incredible with Sidney Poitier. The movie 12 Years a Slave, released about 5 years ago. One I'm always recommending people to read. Of course, this was largely based on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals. But this is another excellent one to watch. For those in the LGBTQ community, this movie was probably the first one to really bring the LGBTQ issue to the forefront in Hollywood. And this movie dates back into the 1950s. In fact, the lead actor, John Kerr, plays a guy who is not gay, but has some of the more feminine characteristics in his life. But he also played the part of Lieutenant Cable in South Pacific, particularly where he sings the song, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. So I highly recommend this movie, which was really ahead of its time, to be put out in, I think, the late 50s. Yeah. Okay. And a couple other things. The Tulsa Massacre, we'll mention that today in a book on it. A Pulitzer Prize winning book, Wilmington's Lie, The Murderous Coup of 1898, of a horrific race riot and political turmoil in the Carolinas, particularly North Carolina. And then a book that also just came out about 2 years ago that cast Ulysses Grant in a very positive light. And in terms of his courage to take some steps during Reconstruction and right after the Civil War to try to protect the blacks in the South, which we'll definitely mention. So let's get going. Our first opening slide, by the way, shows the distribution of slaves in southern United States in the year 1860. The darker the color, the more heavily concentrated was the slavery population. We can see where it was more intense along the Mississippi River, very heavy in Virginia, and I think the state with the most dense and greatest number of slaves was South Carolina. And one person took the black population slavery in the various southern states and compared it to the order of the secession. In other words, which states seceded first. And he found that the secession rate, which ones went first, lined up very well with the percentage of blacks. Next slide. We're facing a challenge. Some say it's a problem, others say it's a challenge. It's definitely both. We are one of the very, very few large non-second tier nations that is trying to establish a multicultural, multiracial democracy. And we're struggling with it. The world is a-changing. If you've got the handout, take a look at the country is changing. And down the left column is the year. And we're roughly closest to the year 2025. You can see the white population, 57.7%. We can see the percentages of various other racial and ethnic composition. And we can see how it's going to change. Now, of course, we don't know exactly the precise change in the numbers, but the good demographic analysts have been able to project this. So here's what things are going to look like, such that by 2045, roughly, the white race will be not a majority, not over 50%. It will still be, however, the largest single group, significantly the largest single group. It would just not be over 50%. But we can see there the projections. Notice the black population is not predicted to change a whole lot. That's one of the more interesting things. Of course, we see a huge rise in the projection of the Hispanic, and the Asian shows a significant increase. And then, of course, multiple races. We're seeing more acceptance and multiracial marriages and combinations, and that number is going to go up. So, as Dylan sang in his song, what was it? The world is a-changing. Times are changing. Yeah, they really are, and we've got to adjust to that. Some people don't like this. Some people do. It's reality, and we better learn to adjust to it, live with it.
In some ways, it's sort of like we went from black and white television to color television. And America wasn't able to make
Yeah.
this push.
Okay, there's also in your handout, any comments on that? Is there any, what's your feeling? Any observations that kind of jump out at you, make you wonder, or? Okay. Now we also have a map here that shows America's racial breakdown right now by state. And the states are not listed in alphabetical order, but listed in relative positions in the country geographically. And we can see that white constitutes the yellowish color on this map. But we also, as we study this map of the states, notice some very, very dramatic differences between states. Texas, for example, which is down there on the bottom part, 41% white, 40% Hispanic. Yeah, and I think that's why Texas is reacting most severely to the border crisis. Other states, Arizona. Also notice some of the states that are almost unchanged in terms of percentage of white. Look at Maine, Vermont, 93%. Other peoples in those two states are very uncommon. Look at West Virginia, 79%. It's very interesting. Of course, California, we look over there on the coastline. High percentage of, in fact, it looks like in California, the Hispanic outnumbers the white. The world, again, it's changing. Comments on that. And of course, these trends and these issues are impacting our country, and we have to learn how to work through them, grow with them, and make the changes. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of white backlash going on right now. There's people that don't like what they see. They want their race, their tribe, their religion to be the big power player. Go ahead, John.
If you could go out 200 years or 500 years, will there be any rights? Is it all gonna be?
Well, if you study world population, it's going to well, that's a whole other subject. We're thinking world population might peak in 2060, 2070, and finally start to maybe drop a little bit, or at least hold steady. But certainly there's no question that racial amalgamation and mixing is going to occur more and more, if nothing else, by the mobility of the world, the ability to go to the Philippines or someplace else.
You're a good historian. Do you remember, do you know your boxing history? Jack Johnson, was it against Joe Louis? He was considered
Last white hope. Thank you.
last white hope. Right?
Great white hope.
Great white.
The great white hope. That Trump really, for numbers of people, is the last symbolizes that, do you think? Last great white hope. Really?
Yes.
There's certainly going to be in the next 20 years, many a lot of backlash and a lot of white racism that is resisting and is angry to what's happening in terms of
It's
the country's composition changing.
It's interesting how you draw the lines. Barack Obama. He's a black.
But he was half and half.
How do you classify?
He was half and half.
Good.
Half white.
Continue to classify.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm also going to pass this around. This is the composition of the NFL and by race. And they're saying, yeah, a much higher percentage of the NFL is declaring themselves, you know, what race is Patrick Mahomes? Yeah,
Ron,
multiracial. Yeah.
you know, given human nature and attractions between men and women, you're gonna look and it doesn't matter color of skin. When somebody's that attracted to somebody else, that lines, and that's gonna continue throughout history. That's my take on it. You know, if you can look beyond and look into people's heads, how people
I
feel
can
about
support
each
that,
other.
yeah.
Don't you agree?
I do, because we lived in Hawaii for quite a few years. And that's been 30 years ago. In our neighborhood, we were the minority. And we were representative, our neighborhood was representative of the mainland. But there was such harmony. We didn't look at one another and have, well, maybe some people did, but by and large, we were a very harmonious group of people. I don't feel that way in some other states. In fact, I've had an interesting experience, personal experience in TJ Maxx just a couple of months ago. It was okay, but it was like, I left and I thought, am I really in America? I mean, I was talking with a French woman, I was talking to somebody from Russia, somebody Hispanic.
You know, you
We
go
were
to
all
the mountains
shopping
and run
and
into
having-
that. I go to the mountains and you run into that, all the different cultures. It's very interesting.
It was,
Ron,
Yeah,
Ron, a quickie. I heard a marketing person, look at TV now. They're picking the commercials and the people. You're getting blends where you can pass for a number of ethnic possibilities.
Mhm.
So it's really, they're focusing more on getting blends that can cover several bases.
okay.
You know, you're seeing that marketing, certainly on TV.
Yeah, they're also showing multiracial couples.
Yeah, oh,
And that was verboten 30 years ago, for sure, show on TV. Go ahead.
The flip side of this, in a sense, is also the extinction of indigenous native tribes. And as we watch the blending in America, we're also watching the extinction of these separate cultures. And so I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, there's a spectrum of where you think you are on the spectrum. I think what half of, 2/5 of the world's population is Chinese and Indian. And to think that we will not eventually be amalgamated into that culture and DNA pool is ridiculous, in the same way that these indigenous tribes have been either gone extinct or been mixed into it. And at the micro level, my understanding is that Middle Eastern cultures seem to perpetuate the, I'm going to use the word incestuous, inadvertently incestuous tribalism of their genetics versus, I married someone who grew up in Colorado. So it
Okay.
happens.
Okay. Alrighty. Next slide. I think we're coming up. You've got this handout. Sell your baby carriage stock. Kids are out of vogue right now. Dogs are in. Seriously. But
Yes, they do.
you need, this is the fertility rate in the United States, and you need about 2.2 per woman to hold the population steady in terms of a lifetime fertility rate. It fell below there right around 1970, and it's dropping. In fact, this chart shows 1.7 for the year 2019. It's now down to 1.62. So if you're a mathematician, you say, you need to be 2.2 for replacement. You're at 1.6. You're 25% short. So now wait a second, Ron. That's why we have immigration. Yes. But that's a whole issue. We could do even do a lesson on that. And then comes the question, well, is there anything wrong with a nation losing population? Can it hold steady? Does it have to grow? And that's a whole economic study.
Same problem in Korea right now, South
Yeah.
Korea.
And many Western democracies, Japan, even Russia has a reward system for ladies that have 4 or more children. You get some extra. And some of the Norwegian countries are putting in more lucrative encouragements in terms of time off of work, financial incentives, and things like that to support the raising of children. And again, that's a whole issue. We could do a class on that. Next one. Okay. Again, the challenges of a multicultural democracy. It's a song by Wild Cherry. Play That Funky Music, White Boy. Does anybody remember that one? And of course, the times they are changing by Bob Dylan. And then J.D. Vance, his wife, is of what nationality? Indian. That's also one of the most overlooked compositions of the United States, particularly if you're around Littleton in Colorado. if you open your eyes, there are a lot of folks of Indian ethnicity and extraction in the country and in the area. Okay, next one. Okay, now going to change gears a little bit. The book talks about three foundational tenets of democracy. And the three it points out is respect for free elections, rejection of violence as a political tool, and also that any group or party should sharply break away and dissociate from anti-democratic forces.
Is that a question or?
That's a statement made by the author of the book. He felt that these three things should happen if you're going to have a good, solid democracy.
What's the leading verb? I see respect, I see rejection.
Dissociate is the verb I would put on it.
Okay, thank you.
Don't embrace Proud Boys and Klan and things like that. Okay. And he said that democracies get in trouble when mainstream parties tolerate, condone, or protect authoritarian extremists. So he's saying these are things you got to watch out for, and you don't want to let these three diseases move into your political party. Next one. Okay. And then here's saying, and here's how you reject those three things. He said a political party should expel anti-democratic extremists from its ranks. It should sever all ties with allied groups and engage in anti-democratic behavior. That's a picture of a Proud Boy. This picture was taken in May of this year. It says, you can read the fine print, a member of the far-right Proud Boys stands for a portrait for a campaign rally in New Jersey. And it said that the Proud Boys organization is growing right now. It's not going away. The author also says to follow these three tenets, you need to condemn political violence and other anti-democratic behavior. And you need to join forces with rival pro-democratic parties. This is more applicable to Europe, where they have more political parties. But even here, he's saying you need to join ranks with people of any group that will help you push back against the anti-democratic ones. Next one. On that first one, accept respect for free elections. This is probably the best speech of all time made, and the most polite and educated and kind concession was Al Gore's concession speech in December of 2000. And to quote a little fraction of it, let there be no doubt, while I disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. And tonight, for the sake of unity and strength, I offer my concession. This was considered really right on. You had one of the best political speeches. Unfortunately, he had it right after he lost. Next one. We've mentioned this in class. Trump hired a security expert, Ken Block, to look for election fraud. And Block came back and said, there isn't any. And he wrote a book that was just put out in March of this year called Disproven. Of course, Trump has not accepted this verdict, this assessment, and continues today to say he was cheated. Next one. Okay, this is maybe one of my favorite slides. I've used this before. I didn't try to overturn the election. I love this quote by The Godfather. Admit what you did, Carlo. Only don't tell me you're innocent because it insults my intelligence. And then Judge Judy's. I love her quote. Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. I cannot stand when people look at you with incontrovertible evidence this high, says there's no global warming, you know, they didn't land on the moon. Don't insult my intelligence. And I hope we all take this attitude. We shouldn't tolerate total, and it's one thing that something's controversial, debatable, but when someone keeps feeding lies in our face, we need to go away.
I was brought up that there was a population explosion going on and that we would all run out of resources about, and I think that was the consensus of known science at the time. And since then, as an example, I'd say, how do you respond is, was anyone else brought up on a population explosion?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was common.
The early nineteen
And now
seventies,
we're
the population.
being
level.
told that it's going to, level out at, what, 6.8 billion? And we're 8.8 billion. And somewhere since then, there's been a shift. And, now we look back and say they were playing wool. And how do we know that climate in another 50 years is going to be, look back on this, how could they have been distracted by their numbers?
Okay, that's another, the scientific evidence, and again, we could have a whole lesson on this, but the evidence now is overwhelming. That's all I can say. And we can do a lesson on it. Also, the thing, Malthus was the British guy in the 1800s that first worried about world population explosion and disaster. Malthusian theory. He created a lot of scare. But what's really stopped the Malthusian fear was the greatest invention of the last century in terms of impact on the world, and that is simply the birth control pill. Okay, next slide.
Conditions
Bring that
change.
up.
Okay. World War I, France, Germany locked in deadly combat, killing millions of people. There was a French general, I think he was the top dog general, Marshal Pétain, and he led the French forces in World War I. 25 years later, 30 years later, as the storm clouds of World War II were coming on the scene, the Nazi movement picked up. And in France, there was an attempt by some Frenchmen around 1940 to kind of take over the French government just before World War II. And that was put down, but the guys that did it were not punished there in France. And then when Germany did invade France in the spring of 42, and of course, France collapsed in about 2 weeks, several of the Frenchmen who had attempted this mini coup peaceful takeover were in bed with the Nazis and joined the Vichy, named after a town in France, from what I understand, and collaborated with the Germans. Pétain in particular joined with the German occupiers to suppress. And these guys in France took on roles such as leading the Jewish removals to concentration camps and doing other things that were totally in line with Hitler's desires. Right after the war, Pétain was brought on trial, sentenced to death in August of 1945, but they did commute his sentence down to solitary confinement. Okay. But the book author says that one of the things you don't want to do is collaborate and cooperate with extremists who try to do a coup or a government takeover. Jim.
I was just gonna mention that his name was pronounced Baton.
Baton. Okay, thank you. Okay. I have to credit my wife. She tells me sometimes, Ron, you gotta watch it with some of these pronunciations. You're screwing up and you look like an idiot, you know. Well, paraphrasing. Okay. For those that follow European politics, you know, you've heard of Orban. If you don't, I suggest you read, but he's done quite a bit to transform Hungary into an authoritarian regime. We won't mention all the things he's done, but he forced out over 1,000 public media employees because they have a strong government participation in the media, TV, and laws passed to force out judges, expand their courts, and he managed to convert a 53% vote, popular vote, into a 2/3 parliamentary majority. Okay, he is getting some opposition right now. There's a guy by the name of Peter Magyar who's rallying and trying to probably run against him. We'll see what happens. Next slide. Okay. The book author also talks about constitutional hardball to kill democracy. Says if you want to kill a democracy, here's some things you can do to knock it out. Number one, exploit gaps. More specifically, he said, there's rules and laws and stuff, like a rule that says when a bill is introduced, it should go to committee. Well, what if you send it to committee, but you wait 6 weeks? And then the committee chairman says, we'll put it on the docket for next year. So there's a lot of places in government where the Constitution says you will take this step, but it doesn't lock down all the specifics, and you can play the system to get consequences that were never intended. And a good example is the Merrick Garland rejection. He was right in the middle of Barack's term. We had a replacement needed for a Supreme Court judge. Barack nominated Merrick Garland, but Mitch McConnell said, well, before, whenever, yeah.
We'll just delay it till forever.
Yeah, nobody ever tried this stuff before, of delaying something for years until Merrick Garland's nomination. So this wasn't written in the rules crisply and precisely. And so got away with saying, well, we'll wait a couple of years before we fill the seat. That's an example of an exploiting the gaps. Another one, a way to kill democracy, excessive or undue use of the law. An incredible amount of unjustified pardons, overuse of impeachment if impeachment merited, and declaration of a state of emergency. Those are the stunts you can pull. Vladimir Putin is a master of number 3, selective enforcement. He has used the Russian legal system to say, well, we'll apply it to my opponents, but not apply it to our people that support him and his regime. So selective enforcement. And then there's something called lawfare. That's a design of new laws to target opponents or rediscover dormant old laws. And Putin in particular has done a lot of that, written in some laws. And in Hungary, I think they've got a law saying, if you criticize the regime, you're a media company, we can fine you up to millions of dollars for undue criticism of the people in power. Okay, next one. Ken, we mentioned the Merrick Garland appointment is a key example of that exploiting the gaps. Next slide. Abuse of pardons. If you look at the number of people that Trump pardoned, of course, every president has done pardons, but Trump, just if you look at the data, it's downright incredible how many people he let go. Next one. We're now going to shift back to the past. For those that watched the movie Lincoln or are familiar with Reconstruction, the 14th and 15th Amendment were carefully and with great difficulty pushed through. in the late 1860s. But they were pretty much wiped out by Southern backlash. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan starting in 1866, the Louisiana Civil War of secret assassination and open intimidation left at least 500 African Americans dead. That's just in Louisiana in a period of less than 2 years. In Georgia, the Klan terror reduced Black turnout in 11 Georgia counties with Black majorities to 0 in a matter of a year or two. And of course, in North Carolina, Klan pressure allowed the Democrats to retake the legislature and force the Republican governor to flee the state.
In those days, Republicans were like the Democrats in
Yeah, you certainly can't take a party's
the South anyhow.
identity in 1860 or 1910 and apply it precisely to today by any means. Next slide. The lynchings. Very few people want to tell you how bad lynching was, how frequent it was.
Lynching,
It was not a rare occurrence.
hanging people, lynching.
I'm sorry? Okay,
Yeah, I think someone needs to mute.
yeah, somebody needs to mute. Okay, that little ball there, that's lynchings per county. And it goes from 10 to 50 to 200, that little ball. And there were hundreds of lynchings all over the place over a period of years, thousands. There was one incident in particular, Elaine, Arkansas. I think they had several hundred Blacks lynched within a period of a couple days.
Mute.
So the frequency and the severity of lynching is definitely underreported in American history. And then surprisingly enough, as late as 1938, 1946 even, the number of votes against lynching bills at the federal level is incredible. There were still 1938 anti-lynching bills were still getting blocked in the American Federal Congress. Unbelievable. So we're not as progressive as we think or thought we were. And history didn't change as fast as we wanted. Next slide.
Those lynchings just for being Black or for trying to vote?
All kinds of causes. Yeah. Again, I recommend the book by U.S. Grant, Klan War, and it talks about some of the things he tried to do. Next slide. 1873, there was a depression that came out in the country, and that depression hovered over our country for at least 5 years. But it said public opinion turned against federal intervention in the South, and civil rights activism faded. You might say America's population, as the Depression of 1873 descended, lost its desire to stay with it and stick with the problem and try to solve it. Putin is trying to do that right now to the United States. He's finding that the Americans don't stick with their commitments and their convictions for long. They tend to, something comes up and they get all excited and they forget about it.
Ukraine, he's waiting for us to give up on Ukraine.
Right, exactly. But this certainly happened as the Depression of 1873 set in. Americans said, I'm worried about my chicken in every pot and my farmhouse. I don't have time to worry about the Blacks in the South anymore. And one paper said, the New York Times declared the end of moral politics as people simply lost their will to commit to some of these higher causes as economic problems came on. 1875, the Mississippi Democrats launched the Mississippi Plan. Terrorist acts were committed in broad daylight by undisguised men. Thousands of Blacks murdered and killed in acts of terror. Next one. True today. They're counting on you to stop talking about the truth. They're counting on you to being too tired, too hurt, too stressed, too distracted. They're counting on you and on giving up. This is advice for today, and it was advice in 1873. It's a problem we have not only in our country, but everywhere. Lack of perspicacity. I think that's the word. Next slide. Again, I recommend the book Wilmington's Lies. An example of how effective some of the Southern laws were. After the passage of the 1901 Alabama Constitution, only 3,000 of 180,000 Black men were eligible to vote. So the Southern states found a whole set of things they could do to neutralize Black voting: poll taxes, literacy tests, property and proof of residency, literacy test, understanding clauses. You would have to go before a judge and answer some questions on the Constitution and of course, they would ask you some questions that would, nobody could answer. Next one. And of course, minority suppressing of women. We've concentrated today talking about how the white majority suppressed the Black race. The sneakiest one of all was how American women were held under a bondage for so many years. Not until 1920 was there an amendment put in the Constitution giving women the right to vote in the United States.
In Switzerland, it was in the 1970s.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
I think 1924 for indigenous people too, could vote.
1924 what?
Yeah, indigenous people could vote.
Oh, okay. All right. There's a great movie, First Wives Club, where, Diana Keaton and who else is in there? Whatever, Bette Midler and Goldie Hawn sing "You Don't Own Me," that song by Leslie Gore. I'm not just one of your little toys. And then, of course, Helen Reddy's. What was her hit song of 1971?
I am loving every woman.
Right, yeah. So that too could be a lesson in itself. Next one, we want to wrap up here. A Century of Darkness. How many have seen the movie Mississippi Burning? Okay, well worth watching. Next one. Some good books. Next one. Here's one that they don't like to tell you about. 1946. A decorated Black veteran came back to South Carolina, and he got in an argument with the bus driver about access to a bathroom. Was thrown off the bus, and he was beaten by a white police chief, and who deliberately gouged his eyes out with a nightstick. And the mayor of the town bragged about committing this, and it went to court, and an all-white jury acquitted this guy in 30 minutes of this horrific crime. So it just shows that it wasn't the way distant past. This issue of racism and violent crime passed into today. Just a couple more slides. 1956, Strom Thurmond approached Al Gore's father, Al Gore Sr., with a copy of a segregationist document opposing the federal effort to desegregate schools. Said, Albert, we'd like you to sign the Southern Manifesto with the rest of us Southern senators. Senator Gore, voice rising loud, said, hell no, and brushed Thurmond and the document away. Later called the document spurious, inane, and insulting. The most unvarnished speech of demagoguery he ever encountered. Incidentally, on Strom Thurmond, he, of course, ran on the segregationalist ticket in 1948. And when he was 22, he fathered a mixed race daughter with the Black 16-year-old housekeeper. So, yeah, he's certainly subject to criticism. Next one. Okay. Of course, the Civil Rights Act of the sixties, 64 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act were passed very heartily by the GOP and the non-Southern Democratic senators. But LBJ made the comment when the bills were passed, we've lost the South for a generation. And indeed that it did happen because of the backlash. Okay, I think, yeah, we'll stop there. I've yacked enough. Let's get some comments. We'll continue.
I have a
next
comment.
week. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm watching the British Open as I'm listening here, and going back to the first, yeah, going back to the first 3 or 4 slides with mixed race, an American young man just won the British Open, and he is mixed race. I saw his parents, and they're definitely mixed race. I mean,
Okay.
and this is what's going on, and I support it wholeheartedly. It's one of the best things ever, I think.
Yeah.
My opinion. That's all I have to say. But anyway,
Go with Tiger Woods, wasn't he mixed race?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Ron, can I offer please a lesson learned for me? The attempted assassination. We're Christians. We're religious people. And I caution myself and I caution each of you, be careful about what you believe. Be careful about what conclusions you draw based on such limited information. There's a lot of religious people that are claiming that God guided that bullet. God guided that bullet and spared Donald Trump's life. That fireman, you tell that to that fireman's family, how that bullet was guided. It's just, I don't want to hush, but it just really upsets me of how quickly we jump to conclusions and formulate an opinion and once you're invested in a belief, it's hard to relate. It's hard to say, I was wrong about that. That's hard to do. So we will tend to, through confirmation bias, tend to reinforce our beliefs. And that's all I.
All right.
Yeah.
Which is a fine advertisement for a lesson I've set up with Steve for August 18th. Based on the great course, Your Deceptive Mind, that day we're going to talk about conquering your deceptive mind. And we'll get into some of those confirmation bias and how our own minds can be led astray easily.
Ron, I agree. But it all depends on where a person's coming from. You know, they're gonna look at the other person and say, you're being deceived, or your mind is deceptive. My mind is not deceptive. So that's the tricky part, you know, is that, I mean, I have friends that would say, absolutely, that bullet was guided by God. And they would look at us and say, you're being deceived by the fact that you don't believe that. So I think that might be one of the issues that we have, is the fact that everybody's pointing fingers at the other people saying you're being deceived. But I think what you say is, watch what you say. Don't pronounce that. Don't say that, you know, because then you're going to be looked at as, oh boy, you're really being deceived, you know, so.
There was a young black pastor that spoke at the Republican convention that was very animated. And I remember he said, you can't deny you can't deny that God saved Donald Trump from that bullet for a time such as this. I memorized it the way he said it. You can't deny it. Yeah.
And
I
yet,
thought a lot of people would disagree.
and yet Harvey Martz posted on Facebook. Beware if you think God tilted this bullet, and he didn't tilt the bullet for a classroom of bullets fired in Uvalde, Texas.
Or for the firefighter who was
Yeah.
killed there, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've got just a minute or two left. Zoomers, would anybody like to comment anything on Zoom? We're always glad to have you here. We can offer the Zoom option. Okay. Ron, any final thoughts? Anybody final thoughts? Well, this is a good setup for next week, talking about minorities in politics.
Right.
Also, you want to give us a preview, what we talked about the Electoral College?
Yeah, we'll look at the Constitution and actually some weaknesses in the Constitution that were put in there to protect the minority, but in doing so, enabled the minority to overpower the majority in many cases and take control.
And the Constitution was created by we humans.
And we'll also look at
It's not
recommendations that the Constitution should be changed.
Even an easy process. Yeah, maybe it's too hard to change the.
Yeah, it is, and we'll argue that it's too difficult to change some of the things. We'll look at how our Constitution fares to some of the other Western democracies.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ron. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you, Ron. It was really good. Bye.
lightning out.
Yes.
Very-
I'm really glad.